York's nervousness is causing unease in the rest of the world's markets. The tragedy's effect on corporate America is grim. Continental Airlines, for instance, says the industry's been losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day following the attack. Indeed, some airlines face bankruptcy. A number of other US corporations are expected to announce serious financial problems as a result of the attack. General Electric, Ford, Delta Airlines have issued profit warnings on Friday that were linked to the devastation. That number is expected to increase enormously. Insurance companies are expected to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars. Those are already offering profits warnings and losses. And finally, perhaps the crux of this economic side of the story, consumer confidence is going to be severely dented. That could take an enormous chunk out of the retail sector. Putting it bluntly, who wants to go out shopping at a time like this? Asia is wrapping up its trading day. Let's get all the market details. Andrew Stevens stands by in our Hong Kong bureau. Andrew, with New York almost ready to go, how did Asia fare?
Well, certainly no hints or no expectations here, Richard, of anything like a patriotic rally. Across the board, it was another big sell-off in Asia. Wall Street's reopening is weighing very much on the minds of investors here. Most people preparing for what they expect will be a big sell-off. It's not just the financial markets either, as you were saying. The economy is weighing heavy here in Asia. The threat of a recession in the United States also putting extra pressure on markets here in Asia that have already been weak for months.
It's going to be the North Asian markets which are probably the most vulnerable because they are most dependent on US trade. So it's markets which have high export dependencies into the US which are probably going to take the most of the direct brunt of it. But largely this was the position beforehand. It's just more so now. It was markets that had high-tech dependence, high-tech weightings that were potentially most vulnerable, and I think the same goes through now.
Well, most of the markets have already closed here in Asia. Just a few markets still open for the last few minutes of trade. Let's start with the numbers in Tokyo. Nikkei extending last week's 5% decline, closing at a new 17-year low on Monday. The average falling another 5%, closing just above that 9,500-point level. In Seoul, South Korea, the Kospi was down 2.8%, its lowest close since December 1998. The tech-heavy KOSDAQ down 8%, as hopes there fade for any sort of recovery in the global IT sector. Australia's S&P ASX 200 down 4.7%. It's at a 17-month low as investors priced in a fall of as much as 10% in New York when trading there resumes. Here in Hong Kong, where trading has just finished, the Hang Seng Index down more than 3%. Hong Kong's dominant carrier, Cathay Pacific Airways, not surprisingly among the worst hit of the blue chips in Hong Kong, down 10% on the day. Throughout Asia, in fact, other airline stocks also suffering sharp declines, including Korean Air and Japan Airlines. Well, all major Asian stock markets did fall deeply ahead of New York's reopening, the airline and insurance stocks taking the biggest falls. And Richard, they are the big movers so far today, and we'll of course be watching this. Asia will be reacting to Wall Street's open in about 12 hours from now.
Many thanks indeed, Andrew Stevens in Hong Kong. Before I leave you, Michael and Colleen, perhaps in these moments of financial grimness, a point of interest. Warren Buffett, one of America's largest and most profitable investors, says he won't be a seller when the market opens on Monday. In fact, Mr. Buffett says if prices fall far enough, he might even go into the market as a buyer. A note of optimism to leave you with. Michael, Colleen in Atlanta.
You'd think he'd have a rough idea, wouldn't you, Richard? Thanks. OK, now let's bring you up to date on the latest developments. Rescue efforts continuing in New York City. Around 5,000 people are missing following Tuesday's attacks. Many of the missing now, of course, feared dead. But rescuers say they are not ready to call the operation off, the rescue operation, that is. They say there is still a possibility that some people somewhere might be buried alive. And that is keeping the hope alive for thousands of friends and families waiting to hear from and about their missing loved ones. Meanwhile, people across the country, in fact across the world, packing churches and holding candlelight vigils over the weekend to mourn the victims. OK, meanwhile, a high-level Pakistani delegation is in Kandahar in Afghanistan with a message from the United States. Washington is giving the country's ruling Taliban 72 hours to hand over the suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden. The FBI searched apartments in Florida and New Jersey, meanwhile, on Sunday. They say those apartments have ties to either the suspected hijackers or their accomplices. Also, we should tell you that 2 new arrest warrants have been issued for so-called material witnesses. Colleen.
All right, Michael, we want to take you now to the Pentagon to show you what's happening there. We've got Mark Potter there, the wee hours of the morning here in the United States. Mark, what's going on?
Well, good morning, Colleen. U.S. officials say the new war on terrorism will not be a conventional war where you have large armies and navies fighting over territory. Instead, they say it will have many aspects and will feature intelligence gathering and unconventional military tactics. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld says that the attempt to root out the terrorist organizations will not be an antiseptic war of cruise missile strikes and high-altitude bombing where Americans can stay safely out of harm's way. And he says it will not be quick.
It will take a broad, sustained effort that will have to use our diplomatic, our political, our economic, our financial strength, as well as our military strength, and unquestionably unconventional techniques. And it will take time. It's not a matter of days or weeks. It's years. It's going to take the support of the American people, and I have every confidence it'll be there.
At the Pentagon, 24 hours a day, workers are still clearing the debris and FBI agents are gathering evidence. They are being supported by a small army of volunteers. The estimated death toll is 188 people. Rebuilding the Pentagon building itself will take years and could cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Flying in from Travis Air Force Base in California were 32 military reservists, mortuary specialists to help identify the victims. President Bush has ordered the activation of 35,000 reservists to help protect the country and assist the recovery efforts. Secretary of State Colin Powell says in light of the attacks in Washington and New York, the goal of the new war on terrorism is clear.
To make sure that nothing like this happens again, and to make sure nothing like this happens again by going after the sources, the terrorist sources and those who harbor terrorist activities and terrorist groups, and destroying those networks, those groups, and making sure it is no longer in anyone's interest to harbor or provide haven for such groups.
Now, the Pentagon is not revealing any of its specific plans, but it warns Americans to brace for a long, drawn-out, unconventional war on terrorism. Colleen?
Mark Potter at the Pentagon, thanks very much. Michael?
Okay, the US war against terrorism is drawing some fault lines around the world. Not surprisingly, Pakistan's President Pervez Musharraf is facing fire at home for pledging to support the US in its war against terrorism. This could pit Islamabad against Taliban rulers in neighbouring Afghanistan. The Taliban have refused to hand over chief suspect in Tuesday's attacks, Osama bin Laden. Now, a high-level Pakistani delegation is in Kandahar in Afghanistan. They're bearing a message from Washington demanding the Taliban reverse its position. Now, on Sunday, Islamic fundamentalists waged protests in Pakistan in support of the Taliban. Demonstrators say they will fight, quote, shoulder to shoulder, unquote, with the Afghans in the event of a US attack. Well, on the streets of Afghanistan, a feeling that US wrath is closing in on the troubled people. Nick Robertson reports on how Afghans view the crisis in the United States from their ever-growing isolation.
Bustling trade in Afghanistan's street markets belies an impending sense of isolation beginning to grip many Afghans. Concerns about the likelihood of an American attack and the possibility borders with Pakistan and Iran may close have driven food prices up 10 to 15%. Concern also Afghan people could become innocent victims. They should wait until it's clear Osama was involved, this vendor says. America shouldn't make any attack on Afghanistan, this trader says, because the Afghan people are not involved and not responsible. Many here, however, are too poor to flee the cities. 22 years of conflict has ruined infrastructure and economy alike. The years of war have also built up a resilience among many Afghans, to the point where a new attack would be a continuation of their ongoing battles. The result of Russian aggression was the breaking of Russia into 16 countries, this old man says, remembering the 1980s Soviet occupation. If America attacks us, Allah will divide America into 52 pieces. From influential tribal elders, not necessarily aligned with the Taliban, however, a call for diplomacy.
We advise the Taliban that they must discuss everything with everyone and not close the doors to negotiation.
However, the tribal elders also said if Afghanistan is attacked, they will back the Taliban to the end, a sentiment echoed on the streets here. As the last of the international aid workers began leaving because the Taliban said they could no longer guarantee their safety, Afghanistan's total isolation appears now closer than ever. Nick Robertson, CNN, Kabul, Afghanistan.
Well, Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi, has warned the United States that it risks getting dragged into a Soviet-style quagmire if it commits ground troops to Afghanistan. Mr. Gaddafi, a frequent critic of the United States, says Washington has the right to respond militarily to Tuesday's attacks, but he's called for US President George W. Bush to show restraint in the fight against terrorism.
To Germany now, where more than 500 firefighters marched through Berlin on Sunday in memory of their dead U.S. colleagues. Starting at the German capital's City Hall, they walked to the U.S. Embassy where they laid flowers and a wreath. More than 300 New York firefighters still missing after Tuesday's attacks. Many are believed to have been killed when the two World Trade Center towers collapsed. A prayer service Sunday in Morocco included people of the Muslim, Jewish, and Christian faiths. The memorial service at the Great Cathedral of Rabat honored victims of the attacks in the United States. The U.S. ambassador in Morocco, Margaret Tutwiler, has thanked the Moroccan people for their messages of sympathy. The U.S. diplomat also praised King Mohammed VI for joining Mr. Bush in his condemnation of international terrorism. And in Cuba now, moved by Tuesday's terrorist attack, Cubans joined with diplomats from across the world to commemorate the victims. At a memorial mass in Havana Cathedral, Cardinal Jaime Ortega urged leaders not to respond to last week's atrocities, warning that that would lead to what he called a spiral of vengeance. A U.S. diplomat attending the service expressed his gratitude to Cubans for their support. And back in the United States on Sunday, thousands of people turned out to a candlelight vigil, this one held in Miami. It was one of two memorial services taking place in the greater Miami area. It was organized by city officials and locals who've been just so moved by recent events, like so many. Michael.
Absolutely. Well, New Yorkers are also taking time to mourn, even as they keep up hope. Rescue efforts have been going on, as we've been reporting non-stop, of course, since Tuesday's attack. Let's go back to Alessio Vinci now, who's been in New York City in these wee small hours. Alessio, what have you got for us?
Well, Michael, one thing I knew about New York is that it was a town that never sleeps, and then we have a proof of that here on the ground where the two towers of the World Trade Center collapsed. The rescue operation is in real full swing. Officials here continue to call it a search and rescue operation because they believe that some people may still be alive underneath that rubble. The rescue operation has been going on now for over 6 days. The 20,000 tons of debris has been removed from the site so far, but rescue officials are telling us that as many as 500,000 tons of debris will be removed from the site. It is a staggering number of debris. Now, most of the rescue workers with whom we have talked to are extremely frustrated, especially because so far what they have been able to dig out of the rubble is mainly either bodies or parts of bodies, but no survivor. But today we were able to speak to one survivor, one police officer who was inside one of the two towers which collapsed after being hit by the hijacked planes. And this police officer, talking to one of our reporters, basically offered some words of encouragement to the rescue workers and told them not to give up.
I'm here today, and I'm here to tell everybody, especially the rescuers, that I know that they haven't found anybody in a while, and that you can survive something like this, and I'm living proof of that. If that helps you to keep going, then I've done my job today.
Well, to give you a better sense about the magnitude of the disaster, these aerial pictures that we shot earlier today, or earlier yesterday, I should say, can tell you how big and the devastation is. 7 buildings collapsed. The 2 towers, of course, the World Trade Center, but also the other 5 buildings surrounding the areas. And of course, there are other buildings